Okay, so quick 60-second clip, real quick. It's a debunk to hypostatus or hypostatus within Catholic Church or just Christianity. So basically, the debunk goes like this. So basically, in the Christian view, basically, it's just that God has 100%, nature and a 100% human nature, right? The reason why this is contradictory and logically or just internally inconsistent to actually serve as a logical model of argumentation or actually just a utility to a pragmatic theory of truth is that when you have a human nature, right, you have the properties of human nature, right? Properties of human nature include the properties of having knowledge. That's just rational. That's what really creates a human sentience, rationality, right? But because humans are contingent and have limited things like knowledge and etc. like that, our knowledge is limited. We don't know things like, say, for an example, a human is capable of being agnostic, right? That's literally just a fucking property in itself. Being rational, but our rationality can be impacted. Say, for an example, things within like school, our knowledge can increase, our brain functions increase, right? Neurons and neurons and etc. Right? Our nature is capable of being changed, right? So when we take that into account, we also take into account numerical identity. Numerical identity is when something is identical to something in the sense that it's all the same value, right? So let's just say, for an example, someone has the same IQ as this one, right? That invokes Leibniz's law, right? But we're not talking about that. We're talking about numerical identity, right? So if someone in that case, right, numerical identity, right? Back to where I was because I fucking forgot my thought. But in the case that there's fucking intelligence being increased, right? It's the same value as this, right? If our intelligence can be increased, right? Our nature is capable of being changed, right? And it's the same value as this, right? Our our nature, right? In terms of value, is capable of being changed and enacted upon by other things, right? Like knowledge or just the like things like capable of like changing, right? Change affects us externally, right? Or we intake our nature is capable of being changed. So as a human, or just humans in general, it affects the numerical identity in that sense where say for example x equals x, right? But because it changes within that a certain property or a qualitative measurement of a qualitative property, like say for example the qualitative property is the qualitative property of this certain being, right? In that case, the qualitative property of the said being or the model of ontology is capable of being changed or enacted upon, right? That just invokes the contradiction explained within Actus Purus. Actus Purus basically just suggests that God is basically absolute, cannot be changed, or actually doesn't, have like potentiality, right? But if we have the potentiality for change and etc. within like characteristics like our knowledge and rational nature, our rational nature is capable of being changed, like our freaking IQ, like rational things which form the basic rational of a being, right? Within numerical identity standards, right? It's capable of being reflexive of that. Our rational nature is basically just going to be reflexive of the same value it has, or the epistemic value of the proposition being granted. Basically, the epistemic value is the things we deduct for the truth maker of the proposition. It's basically just reflexive of what I'm saying. Basically, in that case, our knowledge is reflexive of that certain property or rationale, and if that property is capable of being, enacted upon, that's a part of the human nature, right? Now, if that's a part of the human nature, so in that case, P1, human nature is capable of being changed. P2, in that case, human nature is capable of being enacted upon by a certain set of knowledge and etc. Right, externally that invokes another contradiction within absolute things. And the reason why this is a contradiction because something that's supposed to be absolute cannot change. It's supposed to be absolute. It's supposed to be this certain thing, but then that invokes a contradiction because there's a dichotomy existing between that, and the sets don't actually correlate or actually have a correspondence or symmetrical relationship between them, where it establishes a connective argumentation or deduction, right? So if that's the case, our nature is capable of being changed upon. Conclusion, in that case, human nature is capable of being acted upon and actually has potentiality. Well, in that terms, I'm going to use another disconjunctive type thing, a proposition like, let's just say, for example, God's nature within Christianity. In that case, inside one of the sets of James verses and etc., God cannot be tempted, which means he has no potentiality or fallibility within that category. It's infallible. If a human nature from the previous syllogism, right, in numerical identity, right, it invokes Leibniz's law. Everything is like down to like every property, right? The set of all properties and attributes are identical to the other set, which establishes a symmetrical relationship, right? If all properties are the same thing, right, that means it is identical, right? In that case, referring back to that point, right? But if that is capable of having potentiality to change and then that property isn't the same as from before, it's a distinct property, the set is contradicted, right? That means if I have 100% human nature capable of having a set, but then another set spawns which has, almost all the same properties but a distinct numerical identity because it is capable of being acted upon, that allows for potentiality. If God cannot have potentiality, he cannot have something within his nature or a qualitative property being human if it has potentiality, because that's logically inconsistent with, infallibility. It exposes fallibility within his nature, even though he has infallible nature from the previous qualitative properties already established and prescribed to that. So it's already a form of contradiction and illogical and already observed from the hypostatus argumentation. And human nature is capable of changing through the example of knowledge. Our rational nature is capable of changing, and that's already empirically provided. So you cannot grant that human nature is going to be the case where Jesus can obtain, 100% human nature and 100% God, right? He has to be either one, because one is logically inconsistent, while the other interpretation can be God, right? Doesn't necessarily have, contradictions if you add that he's human, right? Not to mention that also just makes him, contingent. He's contingent upon specific properties for an identity, right? Internal contingency, say for example, potentialities, attributes must be conditioned for to be described as attribute. Specific properties allow for a specific set of conditioned things which allow for this property to be prescribed to them in an accurate sense. Specific conditionals which grant this property its functions, everything to be described as this property. If this property must have something to be enacted upon, like say for example, must be enacted upon an external thing to actually have a actual value to the model of ontology, will be granted a part of the ontology or nature that just invokes the nature or the property in itself is capable of being enacted upon. So in that case, a property needs an action to actually be actualized as a part of a model, right? That just exposes contingency, and if we grant potentiality there, that means there has to be potential for potentiality to exist, right? That's already like an obvious and reflexive fucking condition. So in that case, yeah, that's already logically inconsistent with it being absolute and God and etc. Like within the Christian view or the Catholic view, like that. So if that's the case, uh, yeah, I wouldn't necessarily suggest actually following that interpretation. I would suggest probably trying to invoke like some actual logical deduction or logical model of ontology